Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. This is the third video in the Bachman book series in which I will be discussing Roadwork, which saw publication in December of 1980. Roadwork is a story that tackles some heavy subject matter, which I suppose isn't surprising for anyone familiar with the two preceding Bachman books, Rage and The Long Walk. I've made videos covering both of those books already, so check those out after you get done with this one. And hey, if you like my videos, maybe consider doing all the requisite YouTube stuff and give me some likes and drop a comment. Unless that's too much to ask. I wouldn't want to inconvenience you or anything. What, you think you're too good for me? You think you can just come by whenever you want and just watch my videos just because because you feel like it? I don't owe you anything. I give and I give and I give, but you can't even be bothered to click a couple buttons? After everything I've done for you, after all I have sacrificed, you ungrateful, selfish piece of Oh my. I am so sorry. These Bachman books have this terrible ability to bring out all of my anger and frustration. They prod at all of the dark impulses and subconscious contempt that is buried in the dark recesses of my mind. What I meant to say was, please like and subscribe. Thanks in advance. Roadwork, synopsis as provided within the novel. They targeted his life for demolition. That's how George Bartholomew Dawes saw it when a conglomerate bought the company he worked for and made him feel like a number. When the government told him to move out of the home he had put a lifetime of living into to make way for a highway project. It seemed to George that his whole world had been invaded by acquisitive demons who expected him to surrender to their will, calmly, politely, step aside. No waves, please. But some very incorruptible voice in George's mind kept reassuring him that sooner or later the irresistible force of progress would come face to face with an immovable object, the will of George Bart Dawes. The impact, he suspected, would be shattering. Resentment. The feeling of displeasure or indignation at some act, remark, person, etc., regarded as causing injury or insult. Roadwork is a story of deep, long-developing resentment. Resentment for an unsympathetic world, for the unrelenting forward movement of time, for progress, for life in general and the unfeeling way that it casually lays waste to your plans, your goals, and your dreams with no regard for your comfort, happiness, or well-being, dealing blow after blow in succession even after you've done everything right. After you played by the rules and worked so hard for everything you have, and yet it feels as if everything is falling apart around you and all the things you've worked for and built up are being gradually torn away by the powers that be, with no regard for what it's doing to you or for what you've been through. The cold, impersonal, callous hands of humanity, of God, of the world at large, form into fists and bludgeon you over and over again until you lose the will to keep trying, and the only hope you have left, the only desire you can salvage is one of misguided revenge. Your last act is to be one of retribution, and no matter how futile or ineffectual it may be, there is nothing left for you, nothing left of you, so you have to try and do what you can to reclaim control of your own narrative, even if it means destroying what little you have managed to hold on to. Dawes comes to resent the concept and the promise of the American dream. His family is broken, his job unfulfilling, His community gradually becomes unrecognizable, his home torn from him by an imposing government. He discovers that what was promised was a lie, that he has been led astray and made to strive toward an unattainable future, and instead finding his existence one of complacency, modest contentment, and mediocrity. Yeah, Roadwork is a lighthearted, uplifting story. To be clear, Dawes is not a good guy, though he has experienced a trauma that has most certainly expedited his descent into instability. His disregard for how his actions will affect others, specifically his co-workers and his wife, portrays a man incapable of empathy, and while we may sympathize with him on some level, in many instances his inability or unwillingness to take into consideration the way in which his actions will impact the lives of others leaves the reader feeling more for those caught in his wake than for Dawes himself. Corporatism. Our protagonist, for lack of a better word, Bart Dawes, works at the Blue Ribbon Laundry, a familiar location to King readers that also shows up in Carrie and, of course, in The Mangler. Dawes has worked there since his teenage years, back when the Blue Ribbon was a family-owned and operated business, but after the laundry is acquired by a corporate entity, Dawes finds himself working for a business that no longer cares about its employees and is indifferent to the intricacies of day-to-day operations and those who attend to them. He longs for the days when the boss stood with his workers, suffering alongside them as well as sharing in their successes. Now he is jaded and disenchanted by the impersonal, uncaring management hierarchy he finds himself working within, and when the time comes for Dawes to act to ensure the future of the laundry business, the jobs of those employed there, and to ensure his own future, he chooses inaction out of spite, which in turn leads to the closing of the Blue Ribbon and the loss of his job. And Dawes doesn't have a plan, or at least not a fully formed one. All he knows is that he would prefer to upend the entire business and his life rather than continue to work within a corporatist system that mistreats and neglects the workers responsible for their success. And the laundry is just one example of this changing trend that Dawes observes and strongly dislikes. Dawes isn't necessarily anti-capitalist, but rather, he is against corporatism and the faceless power structures that are, at the time, just beginning to creep into American society, overtaking or buying up mom-and-pop shops and family-owned businesses, leaving regular folks out to dry while they accumulate greater power, influence, and wealth. When he wrote Roadwork, King certainly saw the writing on the wall in regards to what the capitalist economic system of the United States was becoming, and while King, by way of Dawes, feels a lot like the old man yells at cloud meme at times, his concerns are justified. The economy of the U.S. is now ruled over by a small number of companies that are worth billions, causing small businesses and small-town main streets to become a dying breed. In Roadwork, King manages to foreshadow and criticize what would ultimately become the economic climate of modern-day America. With the advent of internet shopping, big box chain stores that sell anything and everything 24 hours a day, and the overall Walmartification of consumerism, King couldn't possibly have known to what extent these systems and corporations would encroach on everyday American life. But it's safe to say he at least had a sneaking suspicion of the direction things were heading. Honestly, when reading this story now, it's easy to imagine Dawes as a disgruntled Amazon employee who is disillusioned and embittered by what he has begrudgingly become acclimated to, and the system that he is an unwilling participant in. Eminent Domain Abuse. In addition to his misgivings regarding his employer and the growing corporate influence over American consumerism, Dawes' entire life is being uprooted by a new throughway that is planned to go directly through his home and property. Dawes is being forced to relocate, and while he's being offered fair compensation by the state, he doesn't want to move. He has built a life in this home, and no amount of money or financial persuasion can outweigh the sentimentality he feels. However, his ability to choose, his autonomy, is being stolen from him. And the worst part, what we come to find out once all is said and done, is that the throughway is being built in order to meet a spending quota rather than out of necessity or ingenuity. The road is a means with which to justify continued funding for the city, and not due to being some necessary beneficial expansion. It's all a ruse. And this eminent domain abuse is by no means something that only happens in fictional stories like Roadwork. In reality, abuses of eminent domain happen all the time. In a 2002 report entitled Government Theft: The Top 10 Abuses of Eminent Domain from the Institute of Justice, Scott Bullock, senior attorney at the Institute for Justice, stated, quote, "Our cities and states have become like real estate speculators, securing land owned by their own citizens on behalf of politically connected private interests. The abuse of eminent domain is corporate welfare at its worst, and it's happening all across the nation," unquote. Here are two examples of eminent domain abuse which were listed in the report by the Institute for Justice. More than 1,700 buildings in Riviera Beach, Florida were threatened with condemnation, potentially displacing more than 5,000 residents to make room for private commercial and industrial development. In New London, Connecticut, 7 homeowners in the historic Fort Trumbull neighborhood have been fighting for 3 years to save their land from condemnation. In that case, the city of New London actually delegated its awesome power of eminent domain to a private organization, the New London Development Corporation, which is carrying out the condemnations to make way for private office space and other unknown projects to enhance the neighboring plant of pharmaceutical giant Pfizer. In addition to the report by the Institute for Justice, I found a briefing that was brought before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights in 2014. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is a bipartisan, independent commission of the United States federal government that is charged with the responsibility of investigating, reporting on, and making recommendations concerning civil rights issues in the United States. The briefing is entitled "The Civil Rights Implications of Eminent Domain Abuse," and it details the disproportionate use of eminent domain abuse in minority communities, the way that increased tax revenues are often used as a justification for invocation of eminent domain, how politicians use eminent domain to pursue wealth and power, and a whole bunch of other terrible things that state and local governments will do to poor people and people of color in the pursuit of keeping themselves, their friends, benefactors, and donors happy and inconceivably wealthy. USA! USA! I've linked both the Institute for Justice report and the Civil Rights briefing in the description for anyone who wants to work themselves into a seething, impotent rage. Final thoughts. God bless America. These early Bachman books are undoubtedly some of the most difficult books to read, research, and write about. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoy them, but there is a human suffering and outrage that King evokes when writing as Bachman that cuts deep. And I didn't even cover every heart-wrenching, gut-punching theme on display in Roadwork. Dawes goes through so much pain and misery over the course of the book. Granted, he is sometimes at fault for it, but in the interest of leaving some meat on the bone for those of you who haven't yet had a chance to read it, and for my own sanity, I'm going to shut up about Roadwork now. You should read it. Just buckle up and brace yourself for a bumpy ride. Next Saturday, I'll be discussing the short stories The Crate and Weeds, which never found their way into any of King's short story collections, but would go on to be featured in the movie Creepshow in 1982. New videos drop every Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, so kick that subscriber bell right in the dick to get notifications. Okay, goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty pleased with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.